Right, so we can go ahead and get started. I think we have everybody on the committee here. Why don't we actually start with a quick round of introductions, just because we do have some new faces to the committee. I'll start. I'm Anna Trevorrow. I'm an at-large member of the school board, and I'm chair of the finance committee. And maybe I'll just kind of call on people as I see them across the screen here. I've got Kathy.
Yes, I'm Kathy Winchenbach. I'm the Director of Finance and Budget. I've been here going into my third week.
Great. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Chris?
Yeah, good evening. It's Chris McCarthy. I'm the Director of Breathe, and I've got a full 4.5 months under my belt.
Well, welcome to you as well. Emily?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Emily Figdor. I'm the school board chair and District 2 representative. And it's great to see you, Kathy. And Chris, too.
Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam Burke. I'm a District 3 representative on the school board for my second term. Second year, not second term.
And member of the finance committee. Roberto?
I am Roberto Rodriguez, at-large school board member and member of the finance committee.
Javier?
Javier Botana, superintendent, and I cannot believe this is probably the first time it's ever happened. I am the most senior person now in this meeting aside from Chair Trevorrow. So that's pretty cool.
And then we have somebody under Portland Public Schools. I don't know.
That's Greg.
I'll introduce myself. I'm Greg. I work in the IT team, and I host the board meetings and subcommittee meetings when you need me.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Henry?
Henry may just be, oh, no.
He's there.
I'll hide in the background.
And then Miranda.
Hi, everyone. Miranda Fasulo, outgoing finance director, sticking around for a little while, and we'll be on this call to answer any questions, fill in any background as Kathy's still working to get up to speed in week 3.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so on the agenda today, we have discussion of the Breathe program and then FY22 preliminary budget discussion, and then a discussion of our upcoming meetings. So I will just go ahead and turn it over for the Breathe program discussion. Is that going to you, Chris, or Javier?
So let me just tee it up real quick. This is a memo that we are going to walk through that details the challenges that we continue to have with being able to realize the Medicaid reimbursement that we have budgeted into our budget for the purposes primarily of supporting the investment in Breathe. So, I just I think that Chris and Miranda and Kathy have done a great job of detailing everything that has gone into it. I know that it is, a significant shortfall. And, I think we're going to talk a little bit about how we think that where it actually lands and what we're going to do going forward to get ourselves to a place where either we don't budget this much in Medicaid reimbursement, or we're actually in a position to realize it. And so I think that's what I believe Miranda and Chris are going to lead this discussion. So I will turn it over to them.
Miranda, do you want to start it out and have me kind of jump in, or how would you like to go?
I was expecting you to lead, if that's cool. Do you have, are you a co-host? Yes.
Yep. Happy to do that. So I believe everybody has at least seen or received a copy of the memo, and I believe also a slide deck, just kind of outlining some things. So if it's the pleasure of the committee, we'll go run through the slide deck relatively quickly, and then we can go to some questions and discussion around what was there plus what's in the memo. Does that, Anna, does that work for you?
That sounds good.
Okay, so give me 1 sec as I do a little screen share. I'm not looking for options.
It should be an option on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, and it's but it brings up a menu that says advanced sharing options. And then it's telling me whether or not I want to have only the host or all panelists share.
While you're doing that, I wonder if it would make sense, just because I'm not sure that all of the committee members have had a chance to actually read the memo. So I wonder if we could do some high level just setting of how much was in the budget, what we expect the actual, because I've read the memo, I have not seen the slides, and as I page through the slides, there isn't anything that does that high level bringing it all together. So I wonder if Chris or Miranda, if you could start there, and then we can go into the more detailed look at what happened, but just to set the table in terms of, what did we budget? What is it that we are actually expecting to realize, and what the implications are.
Absolutely. So the projected budget for FY21 was a gross projection was 1.45 million. Following the seed, the reduction on that became 530. The recede was 536.5, which would then leave us with net revenue projection for FY21 of $913,500. So, $100,000 shy of $1 million after the 37% seed was taken out from the gross revenue. So we're revising that projection this year to a gross of $735,450. The seed for that is $272,117, which leaves us net revenue of $463,334, with a shortfall then of $450,000. So, call it $500,000 ballpark. So I think the issue around this was, one, we had turnover at the end of the school year with Breathe Leadership. I came on board at the end of August. During that time, I was made aware that there were some challenges relative to billing Mainecare last year. So we put a tiger team together to start working on that. The anticipation was that we would be, maybe a month or two in getting that done. And we encountered a number of challenges that led to a much longer time frame for resolving a number of issues. At the core of the issue was, I would say, two core elements. One was that we had a homegrown billing structure that, in and of itself, was not problematic, but it had idiosyncrasies in it, and had and the people who built it and ran it were no longer there. And so we had to wade through and try to just understand exactly how everything got set up and why it got set up the way it did. With that, we also had to understand how it was interfacing with the different systems, and there's more than one that you interface with in order to bill Mainecare. I guess I should not have been surprised, but I was, that getting all of the different players from all of those different entities together and to all agree on what was required of us was an interesting challenge, and it took quite a while to get that done. And we really did run into things like getting a different answer every time you talk to a different person there. And so they were doing their best, and it was a challenging time for them as well, because everything was being done remotely. And so, I'm not going to try to fault anybody, other than it took us longer. The other piece that we ran into were some of the requirements of Mainecare, where there was a lot of confusion among our clinical providers in our district relative to what Mainecare required, what was required relative to their licensing, and how did those things play out in terms of the district billing against their provision of service. And there was a lot of fear around their professional licensure and whether or not, if there was a problem in this or if we missed something, would that come back to them? Would liability transfer to them as practitioners, and would it impact their license and their ability to practice? So a great deal of concern and fear, and we had to wade through and understand, one, where the concerns were, what it was about the system that was problematic for them, and then get answers for them that they felt were, made them comfortable and feel like, yep, I can go forward and I know I'm protected and I know we're doing things the correct way. So in the end, we worked with Drummond Woodsum. I'm sure you all know Eric Herlin. If you don't, he's the resident genius in Maine relative to special ed law and education law. And the good news was, in the end of this, our original take that we had essentially everything roughly correct in our structure was true, with a single exception that existed because the DOE pulled back a set of regulations that they were planning to put in place. And that led to a consent issue around what's called the individual treatment plan. That meant we had to put in a consent procedure that we didn't believe was necessary. So in the end, what we found is that the structure was okay. Just in general, we were in fact doing things correctly. We were protecting our employees with a key exception, and that was this consent on the treatment plan. And it creates a unique issue. But all of this is premised on the idea that we are doing an exquisite job of being having high fidelity in our IEP processes, so that we are making sure that we're discussing all of the program, discussing the services, getting consent from the team and from parents around what we're doing, getting the correct forms in place, right? And that I can wait, depending on how much minutia you'd like to go into, we can look at that. But there's a lot of pieces that have to be done correctly. And if they are, we're good. If anybody misses any of those pieces, they have to be fixed before we can move forward to move into billing. So that's what we learned in this process. We now have a structure in place. We've got some other things that you can see on the slide deck that we want to address moving forward, just to streamline, become more efficient in the process and so on. But from have we created a model that we know will pass muster from a legal perspective and an ethical perspective? I think we're in the right position now. So this took at least 2 months longer than was originally expected and planned relative to getting this done. So with that, we actually have started the prior authorizations. So we have a number of prior authorizations in. This process it's a 30-day process. You initiate, then you assess. Following assessment, you create a treatment plan that gets approved. You start billing. We can bill for the time associated with the comprehensive assessment, and in some situations, we're able to actually back bill for some potential services, but it's not a high margin opportunity. So it's not something for us to look and say, oh, we'll recover, a couple $100,000 this way. That's not the case. Throughout this whole other piece of this that's important to note is there are quarterly and 180-day reviews of all of these processes. And if anything significant changes during the initial authorization and then that next review, you have to go through the entire comprehensive assessment process again. So major life changes, major changes in the treatment plan, et cetera, impact each of these. And then it's another, 30 days worth of doing assessment, treatment plan writing, et cetera. So it's a lot of detail. there's lots of hoops and there's lots of potential pitfalls moving forward throughout the year. One of which is something that I think you all heard about last year, which is over the summer when teachers aren't teaching and social workers aren't working and students are, not in school and so on. We still have the 90 and 180 day review in place, and we need signatures and permissions and so on. And so we are working on the plan moving forward for how we're going to solve that over the summer so that we are not starting in late August saying we've got 10 days to get all of this done. We want to try to have that done over the course of the summer. And so we're working on how to make that happen. So that's in a nutshell where we are. And I'm happy to answer any questions that emerge from that. And then we can talk a little bit about the FY22 projection relative to what we've put in place.
Any questions on that, Roberto?
Chris, thank you for going over that explanation. That's really helpful. Just for the sake of me connecting some dots, when you say that when we were missing the consent on the treatment plan, is that like the equivalent of like an MD signature, like a physician signature consenting to a plan of care, or are you talking about something different?
It's more like the form you sign when you go to the hospital that says, I'm going to let you do this procedure.
So it's a family member signs the consent.
Right. So what we believe to be true was that the IEP process itself, which is, it really is an informed consent process in and of itself, was adequate to cover the consent for the treatment plan. And this is the weird twist. All of the things we'll lay out in a treatment plan should be reflected in the goals in an IEP. Yeah. Right. So our related services, the work our social workers do, there should be a direct connection between the treatment plan and the IEP goals. However, because we're going to bill, the treatment plan itself, not what you're going to do, but the actual treatment plan has to be signed by the parent or the caregiver or guardian. So, and that was the twist that we got from Drummond Woodsum, was that we were, 98% right, except for this one thing. And so we're looking at that, and we're probably going to add a few lines to the ITP to just make sure that we've got a little bit of that informed consent language in there, which says you have the right to at any time remove consent. If you don't agree with this plan, you can let us know. If you want to change something, we will meet, that kind of thing. Just so that everybody is, and we want to do it in a way that will be, one, easy to read, easy to understand, easy to translate. So.
I see. And just a follow-up question on that. Is the treatment plan only, does that have to be, okay, so I'm thinking that the treatment plan is like your evaluation where your plan of care gets established, and then, like you said, your goals are determined based on that. Is that only done like as an initial evaluation, or does that also happen every 90 days, and therefore the consent needs to be regained every 90 days?
So the review of there's what's called a continued stay review, which is a billing process, right? And then the 90-day review is to look at progress on the goals. If the treatment plan was going to change meaningfully because of that 90-day review, you would then have to bring the parent in, have a meeting, discuss it, and get parent sign off. If the treatment plan will not fundamentally change relative to that review, the goals are still appropriate, you're monitoring progress, but, let's say the student's doing fantastic and 3 of the 4 goals have been accomplished, well, then you might need to rewrite it, and then you'd have to bring the parent.
I see.
Or if their life circumstance really changes. That's another big one, right? If a student suddenly becomes homeless, you're going to have to then address the impact on the treatment plan, and that would result in then having to bring the guardian into the discussion.
Excellent. Good. This makes a lot of sense, Chris. I've worked in healthcare for a long time, so I recognize the challenges of reassessments and base requirements and things like that. So I totally get how challenging this is for our district.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And as you said earlier, the concern from clinicians about their licensure when these issues on billing come up. So I totally get this. I really, really appreciate this explanation.
Thank you. And the one twist in this I'll put out there, just because it's the oddity that came from the lawyer, is you could get a parent to say yes to the IEP, be in full agreement with it, be in full agreement with all of the services we're going to provide and all of the goals, and then they could say no to the ITP, and we wouldn't be able to bill. But we'd still be on the hook for providing all of those services in the IEP. So we are obligated at that point to provide those. So that's one of the unique twists in this, that we just, we'll have to deal with it when we run into it. But it's one of the factors that we try to account for in the projection, by using a couple of decrements in the model. But it's not something we can truly predict. We had one situation with a parent who objected to the presence of a diagnosis, and you have to have a diagnosis to do the request for payment. So we won't be able to bill, unless the parent changes their mind on that.
That's an interesting example.
Yeah. And these are the kinds of things the Tiger team was grappling with for the past few months. Just, okay, they got into a lot of what ifs. And
any other questions, Adam?
Yeah, thank you. Chris, thanks for working on unknotting this gnarly knot. This question would be better suited to Javier or Miranda, but my recollection is that we had a similar shortfall in Breathe in the previous fiscal year, about the same 450 to 500,000 K. And just curious, what is the repetitive issues that got us to that place, and all in the spirit of understanding you're trying to ensure we don't end up there again, but just trying to see the whole picture here.
Yeah, let me take a non-technical stab at it, and then Miranda, if there's, or Chris, if there's anything that you want to add to that. But I think, the overarching commonality is, the basically restarting the process all over again. So I think that, if you think about last, for FY20, this was a brand new program with, implementing all of these protocols for the first time. And we ran into all of those struggles that, are, if you read the memo from FY20 and the memo from FY21, there's a lot of common, themes in there. And so in essence, with, the number of vacancies, the turnover in leadership, the, key personnel that, that weren't, in place, I think that that's the essence of why I think that we're exactly, it's eerie. When I read the memo, I called Miranda to just say, like, am I misreading something? Because these numbers are just, almost to, they're off in the tens of thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands. So, so I just think that, that's the overarching one. I'm sure, I think Chris has talked about some of the nitty gritty, what the reasons were, both, the consent issues, the staffing and licensing issues and things along those lines. But at the core, that's where the challenge, primarily comes in. And so, I think, from my perspective, it's not that this doesn't work. It's that we've not been in a situation where this is a mature process that we can actually look at and say, there's, 5% of people that say they won't allow us to bill Medicaid, so we should decrease by 5% or 20% or whatever it might be. So I think that that's, that's what happens in a more mature system. But ours has been in its infancy for 2 years. It's been reborn twice. So.
The only thing I would add to that is the reason it looks so similar, just from a number standpoint, is the timing is about the same, right? It was about this time last year that they were finally able to stand some things up, and really hit their stride with the billing, and it came from primarily the day treatment side, because that's the easiest side to do the billing structuring.
Okay, that's helpful. I appreciate it. So one of my takeaways is, Chris, I appreciate you not leaving us before the start of next school year. And yeah, I really do hope that we can see through your good work, because this is obviously a negative feedback loop that doesn't help us get to where we want to go. So I appreciate your hard work on this.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the comment. I'm in for the long haul as long as you'll have me. So.
I would just echo that sentiment. I'm glad. Hopefully, kind of coming into this with a year of this having happened already, at least maybe you kind of had a sense of what you were coming into. So that is at least one positive aspect. And I do hope that we can get past this. And I appreciate the work that you're putting in place, and have the confidence that you have kind of put the structures into place that we'll need for next year. Just, I guess the only thing I would add is, if there's anything, that you think you need, to be sure to let us know. It's not the first time in the world the district has had trouble with, things like this. Managing grants, for instance, is something that we're always doing. And on one level, I think we're an organization of educators, and then there's all this regulatory financial stuff that we have to do with, and that there's kind of a direct conflict in those two roles, having to do them both at once. So if there's any supports that you think that you need along the way, just keep us apprised.
Will do. Thank you very much.
Roberto.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, Jeff, board member Jeff Irish sent me a question. He's listening in, so I told him I would share it. On the signing of the consent, Chris, Jeff was wondering, for students who might be whose custody has been awarded to the state, would the state sign such a consent?
Yeah, ironically, it would be DHHS and a representative signing that for DHHS to have permission to be billed by us. So, yeah.
And are there barriers to that happening, or is that?
I would say that the barriers are not that well. Yes, there are some barriers. They are probably situational in nature. I would say that there's not a systemic barrier to that. It's going to be the idiosyncratic nature of that individual child's or student's situation. And, some people are much better at what they do than others sometimes. So
I like that response, that differentiating from it not being a systemic problem and just a situational one. Thank you.
Before we move off of this, are we going to walk through what our assumptions are going into? I think two things. One is that number 450 that we talked about is mitigated by it's mitigated through the additional Medicaid billing that we do as a district. So I think it's important to just walk through that quickly, and then just talk about projections for next year. So
I can start on that, Chris, if you want. And then when we get to the FY22 projections, you can share some of the assumptions in those. I'll share my screen for just 1 second to go to the memo, in case you guys don't have it up. Okay, so this is the number that Chris shared earlier. So this is really the BREATHE programmatic shortfall, which is a bit different from our sort of overall district projection. So this is the number that Chris said before, that 450 for BREATHE. But in the second section of the memo, after Chris goes into a bit about why this is going on, I really just try to kind of differentiate between the Breathe program model and the Breathe program performance versus the district Mainecare and seed budget in any given year. So basically, every time we budget, so when we budgeted this year, our budget was kind of predicated on last year's second half of the year being billed at a high capacity. And when that happens, that second half of the fiscal year seed hits us this year because there's a 6-month lag time in seed, which makes it a little confusing, but that's basically why it is that for the second year in a row, we have, we're getting hit with a bit less seed than we budgeted, which causes us to have a bit of an offset there in terms of our revenue shortfall. So, and in addition to that, there's other factors in our overall Mainecare budget. So Breathe is not the only program that bills for Mainecare. Special Ed does for other services. And also private schools are billing Mainecare. And even though we don't receive revenue for that, we still owe that seed. So that's part of the seed budget. And that's an estimate that we don't have great knowledge into how much we should be budgeting. So we're usually pretty careful in the seed budget. So again, this year we see some offset there. So at the end of the day, so last year, there was even more of an offset for seed. And then this year it's a little bit less. We did reduce the budget a bit, knowing that we had billed a little bit less than we expected. We were going to hit less of our billing in the latter half of last year. We sort of knew that at the end of the budget process and dropped the seed budget a little bit, but not that much. So we still have a bit of an offset there. So our shortfall this year, overall, I'm expecting around 265,000. So that's not a good thing. That's not a positive thing, but we're fortunate, as I've said over and over in these meetings recently, that we have a strong fund balance position right now. And as I've shared in recent meetings as well, we also have a Medicaid reserve that to the extent we need to tap that's available. I prefer not to, because that's great to have in our back pocket moving forward, because that is a fund that will roll over. But we can manage this shortfall. Obviously, we don't want to see this again, but it's manageable for this year. So I don't want anyone to panic about this. So I will scroll down here to the projection for FY22. And I don't know, Chris, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the assumptions.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So one of the things to bear in mind as we go through this is there are a host of variables that will impact billing, right? So if a student doesn't come to school on any given day, we can't bill for services for that day. If a staff member is out and sick, we can't bill for that staff member's time. There's how many days a week are the kids in full session or not in full session? Mainecare has this, and this is something I'm actually would like to talk to the governor about if I have ever a chance. There's a 1 hour billing frame that has to occur in the same day. So if a social worker doesn't get to the full hour, we are not allowed to bill it. So they could do, in theory, 40, 45 minutes worth of work with a student, have a crisis with another student, and not be able to bill for the time with that other student. So all of those, there's a whole host of these kinds of variables that we try to bake into the model as we do the projection. And so when I talk about, there's adjusted parameters to reflect it, that's what we're talking about. We've also accounted for the fact that we're securing permissions that we don't have, but we have to have a decrement in there for some percentage of students who we just can't get permissions for. So even though they would be billable in an idealized budget projection, we're not going to be able to bill for them. So we have to try to account for that. And as Javier hit perfectly, in a mature system, we would have years of data that would allow us to say, yep, we can really nail that prediction pretty tightly. Right now, we're just not in that position. And so we're taking some educated guesses around what that may or may not look like at any given time. We talked about the informed consent, so I won't hit that, and the fact that we're currently doing some formative assessments on our process to make sure that we are getting ourselves into a position where we've maximized our efficiency on this, which I will believe will help us in terms of getting over issues like the summer and so on. And then, of course, we assumed we're going to be back in person, full time, starting next fall, and I'm going to stick to that hope, and hope that the fact that we bake that into our assumptions and our budget will be just one of the things that propels us to that next year. So we'll see how that plays out. So I think the last piece around assumptions I want to mention is that an idealized projection says that we assume that every single person for whom we can bill their hours is able to engage and code those hours on any given day for whatever students happen to be in the Breathe program. It also operates on an assumption that we'll have enough students who are actually billable for all of those hours for all of those people to be billable, with some decrements to adjust for some of the things I discussed. So that's really the idealized frame. If we have situations at one school where we have students who need intensive services, but they don't rise to the level of Section 65 requirements for billing, we still provide them the service, but we're just not able to bill for them. And that, again, a little bit harder to predict what those numbers might look like in any given year. With that said, what we've put together on this is a projection for FY22 of a gross revenue stream of 1.47 million, with a net revenue after the seed of 926,667. So, somewhere between 900,000 and $1 million in terms of a projection for revenue coming in next year, operating on the assumption that all of our assumptions are accurate.
And I'll just add that, this number is very similar to what we budgeted this year. But I swear this is Chris's different projection that he built from scratch, which to me just supports that, the frame that you're talking about, Chris, was right from the start. I mean, Christy built the first one, you built this one. They're coming out to the same thing. It's just the startup issues, kind of continuing. So I was surprised to see it be the same, honestly, but I swear it was arrived at differently.
I was surprised as well, and because there were definitely some different assumptions baked in. So, but budget assumptions, not overarching assumptions.
Right.
Questions or comments on that? I'm not seeing any. So one thought that just occurred to me is we should probably have some discussion of this when we meet with the council in our sort of lead up to the budget meetings, just to give them, an overview of how this is happening. Because last time around, it ended up in the paper and the counselors heard about it, and it just became a little bit of, kind of what's going on. So I think it's a good idea to give them a heads up as we're going into the budget.
If I remember correctly, we shared with them the memo that was sent last year. So I don't know if we could do that again. I'm not sure how to. If you want me to
go back and see who we shared it with, how, was it because it came up in the finance committee and there, that was our response, or were we proactively sharing it with them?
I've checked my emails. I don't have a clear recollection exactly of that, to be honest with you. But I know now that you mention it, I remember, but I had forgotten, honestly.
Yeah, and I don't remember the timing either, and it's entirely possible that we did share a memo and it just didn't get read, but I think just for due diligence and just being kind of proactive about it, since we will be planning to meet with them here soon anyway. Is there any more on that? Okay. I appreciate the update. This is all really good information to have, and I appreciate the work that you're doing to get this program off the ground. I'm still very excited that we have launched this program. I think it's very needed and an excellent resource for the kids. So,
yeah, agreed. So, yep, and I'm hoping that next spring we'll have a very different conversation. So,
thank you.
All righty. All right. Javier, do you need me, or shall I?
Oh, you're free to go. Thanks, Chris, for everything that you did to prepare for this.
Oh, absolutely.
But you can hang out and learn about the whole budget now. So
yeah, I may actually go and do some other work.
Totally understood.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good night.
See y'all.
Okay, so with that, we'll move on to who's next. Javier?
So Kathy's going to lead this, but what we're doing is, giving you a preview of both what our state funding, I think you know what that is, but, at a more granular level than what you've gotten in my updates. So walking through the EPS formula and how we fared and what are the implications of it. And then also a first look at what our budget, what we're expecting our budget to be. I guess I want to, I think I emailed Kathy to have this as part of the narrative, but since I already started, I'm just going to go down there. Just like this is the first look at the budget. This is rolling over everything. It's not, having been filtered and analyzed and, cuts made and things along those lines. So this is just a preliminary look at what our budget looks like with present levels of service and, just escalators built in to reflect, contracted raises and things along those lines. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you. Make sure I unmute. Okay. So good evening to everybody. I'm Kathy Winchenbach. I also just wanted to mention up front that I may need time to research and get back to you on specific questions you might have, but I'll try my best to answer them tonight. So please feel free to ask questions as we move along if there are any. And I apologize for the assumptions I'm making as far as the depth of some of the discussion that you may already be very aware of. So slide. Okay, in this slide, this is the state EPS funding, which I believe you already know that we've experienced a loss in our funding of almost $1,947,434, less than what we budgeted last year. And this gives a little more in-depth view of what those particular line items within the operating allocation are compared to last year. And primarily, I wanted to just show you the state valuation that went up by $668 million, the state mill rate that went down by 28 cents, and then that calculated the local contribution to be more by 2.8 million, and the actual state subsidy to be lower by almost $1 million. And that's all come into play for our projections on our budget that we'll be discussing in a moment. But I did want to just show you what the impact would have been if the state mill rate had remained the same as FY21. So using the new state valuation of the 9.7 billion and the FY21 rate of 818, we would have had a local contribution of 79.7 million. but with the rate being lowered to $7.90, our local increase, our local contribution was 77 million. So it would have been 2.7 million higher had the state not lowered its mill rate. So the total increase that would have been for our local allocation would have been 5.4 million. And the reduction in state subsidy would have been 3.6 million. So I think we're fortunate that the rate went down. And the EPS state valuation is 9.7 billion. And this is just I think this is probably a refresher for you, that it's the average of 2018, 19, and 20 is what the valuation for 22 is based on. That's how the state arrives at their state valuation. It's actually supposed to be the lesser of the 3-year average or the prior year valuation, which you can see the prior year valuation has gone up considerably as well. And I'll be coming back to this slide in just a moment. So this actually represents our baseline budget. This is what we're calling a baseline, which is really before we've really done a real in-depth analysis on a lot of the lines, but just wanted to kind of give you an overview of that. It's also before we've added any new investments or looked at any classroom initiatives. So the only thing that's in here, my understanding is that it does include, the only investment would be the pre-K expansion of the 2 classrooms, because my understanding is that the associated revenue for the pre-K classroom expansion is included in the EPS calculation. So we did include that in here, but the numbers are still in the process of being reviewed. So we just wanted to provide a preview of where we currently stand. And as you can see, it's showing a projected tax increase of $12.52. I'm sorry, it would be from $11.69 to $12.21, which would be an increase of 52 cents or 4.5%.
Kathy, I don't know that that's very visible. Can you scroll up a little bit on that? Or?
I can't. I don't know why that's not showing. I'm sorry. And I also point out just the amount of property tax that would be necessary right now. But this is, again, this is just a preliminary view and what we're calling a baseline.
Can you go back to that? I also want to just highlight something real quick. I think, a significant portion of that increase, you can see that is the debt service. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make sure that that's also clear. So our personnel budget is only going up 2.9%, but a significant increase in the debt service budget.
So we typically want to just look at we know that the FY21 school portion of the tax rate was $11.69. And we know that the city valuation at this point is expected to increase by 85 million for FY22. So it's going to go from 8,070 million to 8,155 million. And this slide is just showing that due to the increase in valuation, the amount of the tax revenue that can increase by about $1 million with no impact on the tax rate. But I also wanted to note that the difference in the valuation between the city and the state is $3 billion, which is quite significant. And that's kind of going back to this slide here. So for 2021, 11.1 compared to here. But anyway, this just is just showing how much we can actually go up. Our budget could go up without an increase in the tax, in the school side of the tax rate. And then just some appendices. This is just a historical overview of what the tax rates this for the school side. I should keep saying that. This is the school side only. We noted that it hadn't gone up last year, and unaware of what it will be doing for next year. And then this is just the budget calendar. These are just kind of reminders, I think, in this appendices for myself as well, to just know that there are some parameters around some of our budget dates, and this kind of iterates what those are. And these are just some of the primary dates, the key dates for the budget, for the timeline, and what we're working toward here. So I didn't know if anyone had any questions.
Looks like Emily's got her hand up. Emily?
So I just wanted to clarify again, the current budget outlook includes built-in escalation costs and the 2 pre-K classrooms. And those are the only cost increases that are included.
And the debt service increase.
And the debt service increase.
For the most part, I think, yes, those fixed costs as well that we don't have control over right now. It's basically, yes.
And then my second question is, have all of the meetings for when we start to, has the calendar for the budget review and consideration process, has that calendar been finalized? I believe it has, right?
Yeah, that's in that appendix. Can you pull that up? Oh no, you have it right there.
I don't have it in my deck. I took it out. Sorry. Let me see if I can quickly find that. I don't know if I can do that. You look here.
I don't believe those meetings have, if we could get invites to all those meetings, and so put them on the central board calendar, that would be very helpful since the dates are now set.
Oh goodness, I can't find it.
The calendar was posted, I think, in the last finance committee meeting, so it hasn't changed. But we can certainly do the calendar invites. But I did want to note we did run it by the city, and they okayed the date. So the previously discussed calendar that we posted is all but final as a budget calendar can be.
Okay, thank you so much.
Roberto?
Thank you. I was just going to ask if I think I remembered there were 2 versions, or there were 2 options. I forgot what it was, but there was one factor that was going to determine a change in 1 or 2 of the dates. Maybe it was the presentation from the superintendent that was pending, or some other date. So we hadn't completely finalized the schedule is what I'm getting at.
That was the version. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
It was just the version that we discussed, I think, was the preferred version of the superintendent's presentation being on the 16th, as opposed to the 1 week sooner. So that's the one that we went with, the one where the superintendent's presentation will be a little bit later, on the 16th, I believe. So it was version 2, which probably makes it even more confusing, but we'll post the budget development materials shortly and have all that stuff consolidated for you guys to access and have it posted on the website soon. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out though, because I know I did post 2 versions. I forgot.
Also, if we can post the slides from that we just looked at on board docs.
I'm working on it right now.
Thank you very much.
So I just wanted to, Adam, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Kathy, could you bring the slideshow back up on our shared screen for a moment, please? I just need you to look at 2 slides with me and perhaps explain if there's any connection or or implications or not between two things that I saw. So I'm thinking about the baseline budget number and then the right. So this 99.5 million, and then over on the city side where you were showing the 11, that there was no change year over year. Yes, this. So this school portion here on the FY22, that number compared to the other number, just can you help me understand any connections or implications between those two numbers, where they stand right now?
This number, this 99.5 million, were 95.3.
Yes.
There would be no tax increase. After that, there will be.
So to reach our baseline budget right now, there's an additional $4 million, which means there would necessitate an increase on the school side of the tax rate. Okay, thank you.
As it stands, yes.
Yeah, that's what I needed to understand. Thank you so much.
And my question was that additional $4 million, what does that equate to as a percentage in the school tax increase rate?
About 3.5.
3.5, okay.
Or no, it's actually 4.5, right? That's what, because that's what you see down there is the 4.5.
Oh, okay, there it is.
That
Yeah.
was showing you was at 0%.
Okay. Emily?
Another way to say it, and maybe this is totally obvious to everyone else, and I'm just the obvious guy, but so for us to be able to not have a tax increase would require that we cut $4 million off of what we currently look at as our rollover budget.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I had two questions. One is I'm wondering why we're using less of our fund. We're projecting, or we're currently assuming that we're going to use less of our fund balance in FY22. I see a 7.2% reduction.
And I think as Miranda explained that to me, that was $60,000 for some food service equipment that will no longer be necessary for this coming year. That's the only difference. We would have kept it the same, I think, at this point, but we knew that that was a one-time equipment purchase last year that wouldn't be necessitated for this year.
Again, it's baseline. It's a baseline budget, so that's the rationale for it. It doesn't mean that it has to stay there. It's just that's the baseline.
Where we started, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, does this include how is this baseline including federal COVID relief funds?
Not at all.
It is not.
This is not. This doesn't include it at all. So this is our expenditure budget, our revenue budget, just assuming, property taxes, fund balance, and non-tax revenue. It's a baseline budget.
So I think it's important to say that this looks like a hard place to start given the priorities we have, especially the priorities we have around equity that we know necessitate real robust investments, but this picture is incomplete, right? Because we have...
This is the very, very, beginning of this conversation. I do, and I know you've all heard me say this in numerous conversations over the fall around the federal funds, is I think, this is where this becomes more surgical than just like, than not, is trying to find what are the things that are one-time costs that you are using the federal funds for, as opposed to, things that are enduring. Because I also want to remind you that what's not in this baseline budget is the 20-some custodians that are expected to be funded out of CARES. So, if this weren't a baseline budget, and then those positions would be in here, and the budget would be $1.3 million higher than it is. So that's a good example of a liability that we are staring down the barrel of into the future, that we just have to be real cautious not to wind up in having additional ones that we need to look at that way.
So I think that how I would summarize the takeaway is this baseline budget is kind of more pessimistic than what we'll actually be able to do as if we were looking at the federal funding streams, and but we still for this year and in a little bit into the future, but we still have a major structural problem with our budget.
And again, you saw, Kathy had the slide that showed what the impact would have been had the governor not put additional money into education funding. The mill rate, should it have stayed where it was last year, which was already lower than it was the previous year, would have wound up costing us an additional couple $1 million in state funding. So that fundamental concern that we've, I feel like the boy that cries wolf, and at least this year it's like a coyote showed up. But we're going to be looking at some serious problems with with our valuation and EPS. And so this, we lost $1 million this year. We would have lost $3.5 million if not for the governor's increase in funding, which is not done yet. Of course, that still has to go through the legislative process, but that structural concern remains and is very serious.
Yeah. Roberto.
Thank you, Chair. Kathy, I'm sorry. Let me start from. I had another question that I thought was really timely and important question to ask from Board Member Jeff Irish about the debt service. I think it might be helpful, and I think we did it at our last meeting, just to bring up that, and if I'm incorrect, please say so, that this is the first year that we're making a big payment on the, assuming that the debt service is going to reflect a payment on the $64 million bond.
That's
expenditures. So I think, could we just briefly expand on that?
It's the first year that we're making the payments on the bond.
Because I guess I said that, Superintendent, just because since I was relaying someone else's question, I didn't want to answer it too. So sorry.
No, I think that's right. That's the first, we actually, and I don't know if Miranda is still on the call, but we actually had expected to have this this payment last year, and then we learned that we didn't, and so we were able to back that out of our budget as we were building it. So but that is what we've been told that is what we will be looking at this year.
Thank you.
I had another question, if it would be okay for the chair. Is there, I assume so, but is there an updated calendar from the city in terms of the schedule for doing revaluation in that, given the pandemic.
I don't have it. We talked about it this morning. We need to get that.
I'll just make one observation, that assuming that it's going to happen in the next year or a year and a half, it actually, the federal funding, while by no means a panacea because it's going to go away and we can't make multi-year investments, could help us essentially be a bridge to after that revaluation is done. And of course, the city isn't expecting bringing in additional tax revenue, but it will shift to in a more appropriate way who is shouldering the how much people are paying in a way that reflects should better reflect the current reality. So anyway, I'd be interested in anyone else has any thoughts on that, but I hadn't, just given how much the pandemic has changed things, I hadn't thought, and the new federal streams of funding, I hadn't thought through that myself yet.
I'm sure we'll be discussing more about that in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, and maybe that's something we can get a sense when we meet with the city as well. Anyone else on this right now? I find this a very helpful place to start, to just kind of get the picture of what our baseline budget is if we were just to roll over everything that we did last year into present day dollars. I think that's just a really good way to grasp where we are right at the start. So I appreciate this presentation. I think I agree that I think, we're in the same place that we are every year with property taxes skyrocketing. That puts us in a position where we're seeing these greater and greater gaps that we have to cover. And I think this year is probably politically going to be a challenge for us to be able to, advocate for filling that gap, both, in the state budget process or at the local level, because I think there's a perception that, we're getting COVID funding, so we're all set, and other sort of governmental bodies have struggled actually to get similar packages from the federal government than education has at this point. So that's just something to kind of think about as we go into this. But I do think it's important for us to remember that the federal funding it's essentially grant funding. It's non-local, and so we really, at the end of the day, are still faced with these fundamental issues. So, Roberto, I see your hand went back up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair. I was just going to say something earlier as a question and caught myself going back and forth. I guess and I don't think that there is, because we would have heard by now, but if there are anything at the legislature, any bills or anything else proposed that could have an impact on EPS. I know that there is something that Representative Brenner put up in regards to pre-kindergarten funding, but I don't think that would necessarily impact. I think that very much reflects some of the conversations that we've had with him in the past, actually, at least from what I've heard preliminarily about it. But if there's anything else going on at the legislature that could have an impact on our budget, of course, it'd be great to be aware of any role we can play in terms of advocacy or elsewhere. Also, just as a quick reminder that last year, while we maintained a zero tax increase in our budget, we did manage to increase, or rather add some investments into our schools. So we did, under the most, I don't want to say unprecedented, but under the most challenging of circumstances, we were able to keep momentum, though minimal, towards our goals. So I just want to say that, giving that history of creativity and commitment to our goals, that even this not so good outlook and this baseline starting point, I think that we're up for the task.
Emily?
Yeah, I just want to, I don't want, I know I say this often, but I just really encourage us to be in closer touch with our state delegation, as well as with MEA, because we aren't the only district that are facing some of these challenges, and there can be small changes to the EPS formula that make a huge difference for us. So, this is a full, this legislative year is a full year. There's not just emergency legislation. This is our opportunity for the next 2 years, really, to see if we can make any of the tweaks that we've talked about in the past. So I just encourage us to have those conversations.
Yes, and I will just mention that the finance business managers do have a group with the state, and we're in close association with them. And they just today, in today's business meeting, they talked a lot about some of the bills that have been introduced that we haven't quite gone through yet. There are quite a few, and we'll be getting into those a little bit more so we can determine if there's going to be any impact to us.
Anyone else on this at this point? I think I said at the last meeting, I think that I would reach out to Nick to schedule something with the city, and I haven't done that yet. I should have done it by now, but I will do that right away so that we can have something between now and the time that the superintendent presents his budget, and we can just give them the kind of the same total picture of where we're at. Javier, do you have any updates just with regards to communications we have or should be having with the state delegation?
I am still working on trying to get a meeting set up with the delegation. I got times that worked from some members, but not others. And it's fallen off my radar. I will follow up with the delegation, with them. Representative Brennan in particular is the person that I go through.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else on this, I guess we can move on. I think the last thing we have is just a review of upcoming meetings.
Kathy, are you doing that? So our next meeting would have been on the March 11th. Is the next scheduled meeting. We're introducing the budget on the 16th. So I don't know if it makes sense to have another meeting before that day, or if we should push to have the one that's scheduled for the 11th to move to the 18th, so that it would actually be the first committee meeting after my budget is out. But I don't know, Kathy, if you had other ideas. We did not talk about this item at all, so I don't know what.
I'm sorry, I did not have any other ideas. I hadn't quite gotten that far yet.
Emily, did you have something on that?
I think in past years we might have done like a little bit of a preview of the budget with the finance committee. Would that be appropriate this year? Do you think you'll be ready in time? Because if so, I wonder if we could move it a week earlier.
I actually should be ready, but I am concerned about doing that because I think that is, in essence, putting the budget out, a week early. So I prefer not to do that.
Yeah, I think usually we kind of tee up different investments that are kind of expected to be in the budget, but not necessarily a preview of the whole thing. So
that I would be comfortable doing. It would be a summary of everything that we will have been doing with the board in the weeks and months leading up to that. So the early childhood, the LAU plan, the diversity hiring that has been featured, that will be featured in board focus presentations over the next 2 meetings, in addition to the one that we had at the previous meeting, the presentations that we've done in the curriculum committee about some of the curricular investments that we're envisioning, the presentation that we did in the operations committee about the IT investments. I think those are, by and large, the major areas that we are, looking at making investments. So we could summarize those in, one time in that finance committee meeting leading up to the presentation of the budget, just to sort of, remind everyone of what is on the, what are the things that we've prioritized as things that we want to do. Also just sort of backing up, I'm thinking of things as as we talk about it, the investments that we need to put in place to conform with the discrimination and harassment policy that we passed in October. That's another, significant investment that we will be teaming up.
Yeah, I think if it's not, too burdensome on staff, a lot of that is, you've already kind of done presentations here and there, so maybe just sort of a consolidated look at that. I would find that helpful. Other committee members, I'm seeing nods. So okay, yeah, maybe we'll keep that. And then if we need to add a meeting to after the budget presentation, we can talk about that then.
I think in our calendar, which I don't have in front of me, in our calendar we already have a date. Were you guys able to find it, Kathy or Miranda, the proposed budget calendar?
It's posted in board docs now. Yeah.
See if I can.
I just put the link in the chat.
So we have that. We were planning to have one on the 18th.
Okay.
And another one on the 22nd. So we need to make sure that all of those, Kathy, if you could work with Anne to get those all into the board calendar and into board members' schedules, that would be great.
I don't think this is helping. There we go. Okay.
Okay, I think we have a plan. Any last comments, questions? Seeing none. Kathy, congratulations on your first meeting. We're so happy to have you, and thank you for the presentation. I know it can be stressful trying to pull up documents. Every second can feel like 10 minutes. So, but you did a good job. So
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good job.
all right. Okay, well, with that, I'll call for a motion for adjournment. Roberto, seconded by Adam. All those in favor?
Thank you.
It's unanimous and we're adjourned.